I thought that I had a completely normal life. There were ups, there were downs, but there were much more positive moments than negative ones. I married Joyce, the first woman I truly fell in love with, 24 years ago. We had two boys, Dylan and Parker, who at the beginning of this story were enjoying the start of their summer vacation before their senior and sophomore years, respectively, at the same flagship university in our state. Before and after that summer, Joyce and I were alone and enjoying our time together. Joyce only had two complaints about Dylan and Parker. The first is that they didn't communicate with her and me as much as they should have. Doesn't every mother of college-aged boys have that complaint, especially about their personal lives, in which they were less sociable than the Sphinx? Second, they looked and acted so much like me that she wondered if they had passed on some of her DNA. Dylan, Parker, and I are all 190 centimeters tall, weigh between 95 and 100 kilograms, with sandy hair and blue eyes. Physically, I'm almost as fit as they come, thanks to daily cycling, weightlifting, kayaking, and CrossFit. Joyce, 5 years and 8 months ago, weighed 60 kilograms, has almost black hair and green eyes, and is in good physical shape. However, the boys do not look like her at all, neither in face, nor in build, nor in skin color. My only real problem with the family is that Joyce travels too much for business. She's away from home an average of 2 to 3 nights a week. My job is local, and I set my own hours. So if she were home more often, we could do more things together and enjoy life more than we do now, especially since money isn't a big issue for us. One Tuesday, while Joyce was on one of her business trips and Dylan and Parker were at their summer jobs, I was just finishing up a 25-mile bike ride that was one of the best in our area. There were parking lots at E along the route, and I parked in D. It was a great ride on a beautiful sunny day with low dew temperatures. I was about to start braking to turn into parking lot D when I came across a female cyclist riding on the side of the road who appeared to be having serious problems with her bike. I stopped to help. Serious problem? I asked with a half smile, stopping right in front of her bicycle. She was on her knees inspecting her rear derailleur and looked up at me, showing her pretty face. She smiled back. Yes, thank you for asking. It seems like the aluminum hanger on my rear derailleur is somehow bent, making it difficult to rotate the rear wheel, let alone shift, she replied, demonstrating a good knowledge of bicycle mechanics. Do you mind if I take a look? I asked. Be so kind, she replied, standing up. I glanced at her quickly as she stood up and walked a couple of steps to the side. I estimated her height to be about 160 centimeters, weight 45-50 kilograms, small breasts, slender but muscular thighs and calves, and a perfect firm ass. And her face became even more beautiful when she stood up. I couldn't get a good look at her hair because of the bike helmet, but since she wasn't wearing sunglasses, her brown, shiny, and expressive doe eyes were clearly visible and very attractive. I examined the rear derailleur and found that her diagnosis was absolutely correct. As far as I can tell, you've pinpointed the problem, I said with a smile, standing up. You also probably already know that even if you manage to get the suspension back in place, you won't be able to do it here on the track. But the rear wheel will have to be removed and the suspension will probably be repaired at a bike shop. That's what I was afraid of, she reflected. Did you park in parking lot D? I asked. No, in parking lot E. About 6 kilometers from here, and I can't get there, she grumbled. I'm in parking lot D, right at the entrance to the bike path. I'll drop you off at your car in parking lot E, I said with a smile. I sensed some wariness on her part, so I took out my ID and handed it to her. Here is my name and address. Call someone you know and tell them I'll give you a ride and that you'll call them back as soon as I give you a ride. This way, if I turn out to be an axe murderer, at least you will die knowing that I will be caught, I stated, saying the last sentence with a wide smile on my face. Only after I said this did I wonder if she would find my joke funny and would she refuse my proposal. A cheeky, impudent man, isn't he? She laughed, instead of running away as a result of my joke. She took my ID, took out her cell phone, and made a call while standing about 2 meters in front of me. "Hi, Cheryl. It's me, Brenda. I'm having trouble with my bike in the bike lane and a guy named Brian Craddock, who lives here in town at 727 Sagamore Lane, will give me a lift to my car. If I end up dead, you know who to send the cops after," she said and laughed into the phone. After a pause, apparently listening to Cheryl, she said, "That's a great idea." Then she looked at me and said with a grin, "Cheryl thinks you should take off your helmet and let me take a picture of you and send it to her so the cops can identify your face in case your ID turns out to be fake." I grinned, took off my helmet, and posed for a photo with a grin on my face. A nice woman who introduced herself as Brenda took a photo with her phone, pressed a few more buttons on it, and put it back to her ear. "Did you get the photo, Cheryl?" She whispered something into the phone. After about 30 seconds of delay, she grinned and said, "You're evil." "Thank you," and ended the conversation. "Okay, now if you dismember me, you will definitely be caught," Brenda said with a smile. "Here, you drive my bike, and I'll take yours to my car," I said, fastening the helmet strap to the handlebars of my bike, and then I took her bike and walked on. We chatted a bit on the way to my car. When we got to my car, I put both bikes on the bike rack in the trunk. I threw the helmet in the back seat, opened the passenger door for her, and she took off her helmet and then got in. I couldn't help but notice her shiny dark hair falling on shoulders. What's not to like about this woman's appearance? I was surprised. In the 15 minutes, we rode to parking lot E, which is further down the road than the bike path. We exchanged a surprising amount of personal information. I was unusually open and talkative. There was something about Brenda that inspired trust. I told her about my family, including Joyce's unwanted amount of travel, and about my 2 boys. Brenda was just as outgoing, and her situation was remarkably similar to mine. Her husband, Stan, traveled on business almost as often as Joyce, and she had 2 daughters named Serena and Kira, who were sophomores and graduates at the same state university as Dylan and Parker. "What are your girls studying to be? Maybe Dylan and Parker know them," I asked. "Not if your sons are studying at the Faculty of Engineering, as you said," she grinned. "Serena is studying art with a bachelor's degree in art history, and Kira is studying kinesthesiology with a bachelor's degree in art." I laughed. "I think you're right. Their classes are probably on opposite ends of campus, with 30,000 other students between them." Our conversation was so pleasant that when we pulled into parking lot E, I said, "I have an idea. Since I'm heading to my gym for a CrossFit class after this, and you won't be riding your bike, but you'll be spending time doing it, why don't you leave your bike at Morton's Bike Shop, which is next door to my gym, and you will be at my disposal. My guest today. Have you tried CrossFit? Are you trying to pick me up?" She laughed. "No, just trying to figure out if your body works as well as it seems," I grinned back. "Oops, did I say it out loud?" I grinned. "You're still impudent, aren't you?" She giggled. "Okay, since I don't have anything else planned, I'll try." Long story short, we ended up going to a bike shop. Working out together for an hour, she did exceptionally well for her first time, and then picking up her repaired bike and having lunch at a casual cafe before we said our goodbyes. At the same time, we quickly hugged. Then she said, "If Joyce isn't home tomorrow, why don't you go kayaking down the river with me? I usually go there for an hour or 2 on Wednesdays when Wall not in the city." "With pleasure," I replied. I was planning to go somewhere this week anyway. As you've probably already noticed, my SUV has a rack for 2 kayaks on the roof. "I'll pick you up at, say, 8:00 in the morning," she said. "I'll be ready," I smiled. "I think you already know the address." "Yeah, about that," she chuckled. "I could have stalked you, but you willingly gave up your personal information." "You wouldn't trust me if I didn't do this," I chuckled. "Oh, by the way, getting back to the fact that I gave you my ID, what did your friend Cheryl say to you on the phone that made you tell her you're mean after you emailed her a photo of me?" Brenda blushed slightly, but quickly came to her senses, giggling. "I should know that, but you don't." She jumped into her SUV and drove away, quickly waving her hand out the window. Brenda was probably the easiest person to talk to I've ever met. Moreover, although she was far from classically beautiful, the shape of her body and features, as well as her general demeanor, made her as attractive as any other woman I had ever met. As I left, I convinced myself, "You have never cheated on Joyce in the 26 years we've lived together, including 24 years of marriage, and you're not going to start now." I hoped I was right because I hated cheaters. Over the next few weeks, Brenda and I became great friends, since we both had jobs that allowed us to work whenever we wanted, as long as we did it. And since we both loved all types of exercise and outdoor adventures, we worked out together at least 3 times a week, usually for several hours each time. It was really great to make a friend. However, there was a problem. She caused me a strong sexual desire. The problem escalated one day when we both capsized in our kayaks and ended up pulling them ashore. At first we laughed and teased each other, but when Brenda stood up, strapping her paddle to the kayak, her face was very close to mine, as close as possible, given the 30-centimeter difference in our heights. I couldn't help it. I kissed her on the lips. When we parted, she looked me straight in the eyes. "You know that we both hate cheaters, and that the last thing we want is to destroy each other's families. It seems that traitors are always caught sooner or later. I like you too, but kissing like we just kissed will lead to sex, and then, most likely, to disaster." We silently looked into each other's eyes for what seemed like a very long time. While I was looking at her, my big head got the better of me, and I finally answered with a smile, "You're right. I apologize and will keep my hands to myself unless it's to keep you from drowning." She smiled back, quickly kissed me on the lips and said, "Since you are so noble, and since you have weakened my knees with your love affairs, how about tying my kayak, in addition to yours, to the roof of my SUV?" I obeyed. For a week, nothing more was said or done, but after some time we had a dialogue. "It's really difficult for me, Brenda. We need to do something to help me cool my ardor towards you," I muttered. "I also need something to cool my ardor towards you," she moaned in response. "But I can't stop talking to you. We have such a good time doing different things together. You're more fun than anyone else I've ever been with, and I don't want to give up on our friendship or activities," I grumbled. After another pause, she raised her head. "I have what I hope is a partial solution. From what you told me, Joyce is a very nice person, and so is Stan. Getting to know each other's spouses, and perhaps even families, can help quell any lustful feelings." I thought for a minute while her mind seemed to be mulling over possible scenarios. "I think you're right," I replied. "What will we do next?" "I'm planning to have a barbecue at my house next Saturday. I'll put you, Dylan, and Parker on the guest list. There will be at least 30 people there, including at least 15 people the same age as Serena and Kira. How do you like this proposal?" "Let's make this work," I grinned, and then avoided physical contact with her for the rest of the day. Brenda's BBQ turned out great. I met Stan and she met Joyce, and the other adults were friendly too. There wasn't a single idiot among them. Joyce and I were introduced to Serena and Kira. Brenda was right except for the fact that each of them was about 5 centimeters taller than Brenda and perhaps 5 kilograms heavier. They seemed more like Brenda's clones than her children. I saw Serena and Kira introduce themselves to Dylan and Parker, and all the kids under 22 seemed to be having fun together, playing volleyball, beer ping pong, and other games in Brenda and Stan's backyard, which seemed ideal for such events. We were one of the last to leave the party around midnight. On the way home, Joyce, of course, tried to ask the boys if they had met any interesting people. All they said, with Cheshire cat grins, was that they had a good time and were glad they came. However, they were, predictably, completely silent about whether they liked any of the dozen very attractive women, ranging in age from 17 to 22, who were present at the party. Brenda and I reminisced about the party when we went for a bike ride and lunch the following Monday. I asked her if Serena and Kira were at all impressed by the cute guys there. Brian, because I had an overly intrusive mother, I never ask questions about such things, and they do not share information voluntarily. Stan tried to ask them about it, but they just laughed at him. We had fun, Dad, but we weren't engaged, so leave it as is, they told him. The party had the desired effect. One weekend I went to a professional baseball game with Stan and two other guys, and Brenda went to a play with Joyce and the other two guys' wives at the same time. For the next 2+ weeks, even though Brenda and I went on walks together 7 times, things remained low-key between us. We had fun, but no kisses or caresses. And then the train went off the rails. In a strange turn of events, Joyce and Stan held unusual conferences out of town on a Friday afternoon and Sunday afternoon 3 weeks after Brenda's party. Dylan and Parker left for the weekend on Friday night to go to the beach, and Serena and Kira left for the weekend on Saturday morning to visit some sorority sisters at the lake house where one of their parents lives. Brenda was bragging about what a good dancer she was, and we were confident in our ability to avoid any lustful contact, so we agreed to go out to dinner and a club. We didn't hide it from Joyce or Stan, but we had to promise them that the 4 of us would go out to dinner and a club next Saturday. "You find the best club for us," was Joyce's opinion. When I picked up Brenda early Saturday evening, she looked as good as ever. Although she wore a dress to the barbecue, which was the only time I saw her in such an outfit, she looked very modest there, including her hair in a bun, no makeup, and the dress did not highlight her toned hips or a sculpted butt. Her dress really suited her this evening. She wore just the right amount of light makeup. Her hair was neat but loose around her shoulders, and she looked radiant. We had a relatively modest dinner, although there was a lot of laughter, including at least half a dozen off-color jokes she heard from her friend Cheryl, a spinster nurse. We went to one club, which seemed too boring to us, but the second one was fun and just right. Brenda was as good a dancer as she thought she was, and for a guy who never learned to dance, I can hold my own with anyone. Plus, I wanted to stay on the dance floor with Brenda because I didn't want her dancing with anyone else, and even then I had to discourage a couple of drunks with my strong hand. 2 unusual things happened that evening. The first unusual thing was that Brenda drank more alcohol than I had ever seen. She and I are both almost teetotalers, but not this evening. Between dinner and clubbing, she probably had 2 glasses of wine and 4 pina coladas, and I just had a couple of beers. Secondly, when we danced 2 slow dances, including the last one, she pressed herself against me. When we drove to drop her off around 1 a.m., she was giddy and chatty. She constantly made contact with me, although in a playful rather than overtly sexual manner. When we got to her house, she said, "Could you come in and help me replace a couple of screens that I moved today? I don't want Stan to know that I did this because it's a sore spot between us." "Can this wait until tomorrow?" I asked. "No, because I want to sleep longer, and Stan should be back after lunch." "Come on, Brian, baby." Brenda noticed that I was hesitating. "I really need your help, boy. I'll even tell you what Cheryl said when I emailed her a photo of you the day we met," she giggled. I relented and we entered her house. She had a little trouble with the key, so I opened the door for her. We made love. We had breakfast. During our conversation at breakfast, I said, "I almost forgot. Last night, you lured me into your lair with the promise of telling me what your friend Cheryl said when you emailed her a photo of me when we first met." "I must," she moaned. "Yes, unless you want me to attack you," I fake growled. She jumped out of her chair, screamed, and started running. She didn't really try too hard to escape, and I caught her easily. I got dressed and got ready to leave long before Stan was due to return. The neighbors on the south side are on vacation, and I would love it if you would go out the back door and walk around their property so no one sees you coming out of my front door at 9 in the morning. "It would be difficult to explain," she chuckled. Let's go for a bike ride on Tuesday. I'll be there on my bike at 9:30 and we can have a snack at my place when we're done, I said with an evil grin. Fine. Sounds like a plan, she smiled back. The feeling of guilt only hit me on Sunday evening. As Joyce fell asleep on my shoulder, I thought about Brenda. I knew I had to give it up, but I didn't know if I could exercise enough self-control to do so. That Tuesday began a series of regular meetings between me and Brenda. Although the days and circumstances changed, over the next few months, what happened that Tuesday happened often. While Brenda and I were in a relationship, we didn't kid ourselves that what we were doing was normal and without possible consequences. Neither of our spouses deserved their partner's infidelity. Despite our feelings of guilt, if not for the danger, we probably would never have separated. We were so attached to each other. On Wednesday, when Joyce and Stan were out of town on business, we went on one of our classic bike rides and then made love at my house. However, on that particular day, Brenda had some other errands to run and I had an appointment that afternoon, so we deviated from our normal routine and she rode off on her bike instead of asking me to give her a ride. When Brenda left for some reason, I immediately took off the sheets covering the guest room bed and put them in the washing machine before I showered so there would be no residue. While I was in the shower, Joyce came into the bathroom. I was shocked to see her. "Hi, honey," she chirped. "Are you happy to see me?" "Glad, but surprised," I answered through the shower door, my dick completely covered in soap. "I finished early. I left a message on your cell phone. But seeing as your bike is parked outside and you're in the shower, I'm guessing you were out on a bike ride. Probably with Brenda or Jack was my occasional riding companion. Cycling. I rode bikes with both of them. Detective Joyce," I laughed, telling my partial white lie. The next day I met Brenda in the park and told her about the near miss. If we had been caught, which we avoided in less than 5 minutes, and only because I had accidentally taken the sheets off the bedspread in the guest room, our families would have been destroyed. Brenda looked very thoughtful. After a pause, she looked into my eyes. "Our relationship with you is the brightest event in my life, but I experience the same feelings of guilt and fear as you. If we didn't have kids, and if our spouses were jerks, things would be different. But we have children, even if they are in college, and our spouses are wonderful people who don't deserve our infidelity. So we need to find a way to end this." I nodded in agreement, and then a thought came to my mind. I could finance our visit to a psychologist to help us decide what to do so that Joyce doesn't find out anything. Do you agree? She said, "We have a serious problem. I can agree with you to pay for the services of a psychologist. Make an appointment, and I will try to make time work for us." We kissed, returned to our cars without computers, and drove away. By the evening of the same day, after asking and calling names, I made an appointment for Friday with Dr. Meg Sheehan, a renowned psychologist and marriage counselor living in a nearby suburb. I called Brenda on Thursday morning and told her she agreed. After agreeing to pay her extra to see us after hours, and after describing to her our problem, guilt and fear, Dr. Sheehan agreed to see us 4 times over the next 2 weeks. We were lucky to have help because we simply could not cope with our dependence on each other on our own. We were getting too bold, so exposure was inevitable unless we could somehow stop it. By the 3rd session, Dr. Sheehan diagnosed our problem. Although she described it in clinical terms, she also described it in layman's terms. Her explanation was this: "You two are simply dependent on each other, especially in sex." I don't use this term lightly. In the media, you always hear about people saying they have a sex addiction, but 99% of the time, this is bullshit and just an excuse for promiscuous behavior. "There is no such thing as clinical sexual addiction?" Brenda asked. "There are several real clinical cases. There may be 1 man in 500,000 and 1 woman in 1,000,000, but they are rare and addiction is not limited to 1 person. Although I can't give you a real explanation for this, you two and yours is only the second in my experience are dependent only on each other. Today, I'm going to introduce you to techniques and remedies that you can use to start ending your relationship because you need to be careful. This is the only thing that will work for you too, she announced grimly. We realized Meg Sheehan was right. By the end of our fourth session with Dr. Sheehan, we had learned all we could about techniques to help us cope with depression and were given a homeopathic libido suppressant to take for the first 2 weeks. Then, in each other's presence, we blocked our cell phone numbers and email addresses on each other's phones. We parted with a kiss that touched our souls. We went cold turkey just before Thanksgiving, and the approaching holidays helped combined with Meg Sheehan's techniques and maybe even homeopathic remedies, though I wasn't so sure to deal with it. For the first month, I called Brenda every day. Sometimes I stopped myself, sometimes I actually called, but since my number was blocked, I couldn't get through. Gradually, I brought other sexual experiences into my relationship with Joyce and made a truly concerted effort to keep her needs and Dylan's and Parker's at the center of my attention. By Christmas, I was well on my way to breaking my addiction to Brenda. Whenever Joyce asked about meeting Brenda and Stan, I avoided answering. Meg warned us that if we met in person, we would certainly relapse, and that after a relapse, it would be even more difficult to recover. It also helped that both Dylan and Parker were on good terms. Not only were they doing well at school, but from what Joyce and I overheard, and from their smiling refusal to answer some of Joyce's questions, I suspected, and Joyce was convinced, that they both had girlfriends. They, of course, often went away on vacation, and for spring break the following year, but they were always cheerful when they were at home. In addition, they communicated with us on the phone even more often than usual, although the issue of girlfriends was not discussed as a topic of conversation. By the time Dylan was ready to graduate from college, I was as proud and happy as I could be. My relationships with Joyce, Dylan, and Parker were as strong as ever, and my sex life with Joyce was more exciting than before I met Brenda. Everything in my life seemed to fall into place. Of course, I still thought about Brenda daily, but my coping mechanisms had improved to the point where I rarely felt torment. I was a little nervous about attending the graduation because I assumed Brenda's daughter, Kira, would be graduating from the same university on the same day. However, since there were over 8,000 graduates that year, like most major universities, the chances of meeting someone from another school were slim. Dylan was graduating from school with a degree in electrical engineering, and assuming nothing had changed since I last talked to Brenda about it, which was about 7 months ago, Kira was due to get her degree at the School of Arts and Sciences Kinesiology, and her graduation ceremony was to take place on the other side. The campus was almost 3 kilometers from where Dylan was getting diploma. Even though there was going to be an all-school commencement ceremony at the football stadium, and with over 50,000 faculty, families, and guests likely to be in attendance, I convinced myself that I had an infinitesimal chance of seeing Brenda. Joyce, Parker, and I were proud of Dylan when he graduated, and the 4 of us took a lot of photos. We also enjoyed the joint ceremony at the football stadium and never ran into Brenda and Stan. Interestingly, though, as we were leaving the stadium, Dylan walked away to return his cap and gown, and me wondering where we should go for the holiday dinner. Parker said, "Mom and Dad, there is something that I have to tell you, and in a special way. Dylan and I booked a conference room on the 3rd floor of the Student Union. Could you meet us there in an hour?" Of course, Joyce and I had many questions to which Parker answered evasively. "Just meet me and everything will open up," he finally answered with a hearty laugh. When Joyce and I walked into the conference room 58 minutes later, I was shocked to see Brenda and Stan there. When Brenda saw me, her eyes showed the same fear that was in my brain and heart. Stan and Joyce were happy to see each other, while Brenda and I avoided physical contact and tried unsuccessfully to act as normal. We chatted for a bit, mostly Stan and Joyce, as both Brenda and I had a deer-in-the-headlights look on our faces until, thankfully, we heard Parker laughing as he headed into the room. If I was stunned to see Brenda, it was not so much compared to how I felt when I saw Parker, our youngest son, enter the room holding hands with Serena, Brenda's youngest daughter. They both had smug smiles on their faces. Brenda and I were silent while Stan, Joyce, Parker, and Serena chatted non-stop. After numerous no jokes, how sweet, and other euphemisms, Parker got to the point, answering Joyce's question about how they first met. It was love at first sight at the barbecue Stan and Brenda had last summer, Parker said. We've been dating since then. Parker then continued. This summer, Serena and I will find jobs at the university and plan to live in the same apartment, not only this summer, but for the rest of our college years, planning to get married after graduation or maybe even before graduation. If we don't, we can wait. The lustful and loving glances that Parker and Serena exchanged made me think that they might not be able to wait. Oh, damn, Brenda could be my godfather, I mentally groaned. I noticed the frightened expression on Brenda's face. But at least we'll be careful, which I can't say about Kira and Dylan, Serena laughed. While this little joke was spinning around in my head and turning into a pretzel, Dylan and Kira walked into the room holding hands. After a long chat, with Brenda and I even more in shock, Joyce asked the same question she asked Parker. So how did you two meet? We felt mutual attraction at the barbecue where we first met, Kira answered, although it wasn't quite love at first sight, like Parker and Serena. However, after our first date, we realized that there was something between us, and it quickly turned into love. We first became close on the same trip as Parker and Serena, Dylan said with a smile, when I was supposed to be on the beach and Kira was at the house by the lake. And then the final blow. Dylan and I are going to get married in 2 weeks. We want to have a simple ceremony with family and friends. We both have jobs in our hometown and an apartment just 3 kilometers from Mom and Dad and only 6 kilometers from you, Joyce and Brian. Kira smiled, looking first at her parents and then at Joyce and me. Why such a rush? Joyce asked. I'm 6 weeks pregnant, Kira giggled as Dylan kissed her cheek and squeezed her hand. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Brenda faint and Stan caught her. I was practically in a stupor. Question, how the hell can I resist Brenda when we are related and have a common grandson? Was spinning in my head all the time. Of course, I didn't have the answer, and I doubted that even Dr. Meg Sheehan could help us with it, especially since it was obviously the biology of fate. If my sons, who looked and acted just like me, were head over heels in love with Brenda's daughters, who looked and acted just like her, what chance did I have of resisting Brenda? Shit. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.